Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to be a continuation of a previous lesson from the 6th chapter in Hebrews. We made it all the way up until the 12th verse in the previous lesson. We're going to take it 13 all the way till verse 10 of the 7th chapter. So there's two things we're going to discuss and cover today, those being the certainty of the promise and the hope in the promise of God and the God who is as great as the promises he makes, and also Melchizedek's superiority, so spiritual superiority, is established and explained over Abraham. These are two figures from Genesis. We'll get to there, but when we get to there, but the material which takes place before it are kind of a warning of falling away, and we have to remember who the audience is that the author of Hebrews, we don't know who his identity was writing to, and these are Italian Jews who were Christian converts who were lapsing towards into the inferior systems of the old Jewish religion. And so he's trying to get them back. In verse 11 in the 5th chapter, he says, "Concerning whom we have much to say and hard to explain, since you have become dull of hearing." So that is unflattering remark to make on their report card, their spiritual report card, that they were not able to hear, not able to process, not able to apply, not able to learn or live what he was trying to teach them. Verse 13, "For everyone partaking of milk is inexperienced in the word of righteousness, for he is a child. But solid food is for the mature, whose senses have been trained by practice to discern both good and evil." So in this analogy and metaphor, the food is analogous to the respective states of one level of spiritual maturity's capacity to absorb and digest. So if you are a baby, you're not going to feed a baby steak or solid food. You're going to feed it milk. That is what their gums, their digestive system can handle. And if you're teaching a baby believer, you're not going to start with advanced doctrine. You're going to feed them the milk, the basic elemental nutrients to the Christian life. But if you have more advanced believers, then you feed them the meat, the doctrine, the steak, and the lobster, something you wouldn't feed a baby knowing their chewing capacity. But then verse 4 through 6 in the 6th chapter indicates the seriousness and the gravity and the consequence of falling away. "For it is impossible for those who were once enlightened and have tasted the gift of the heavens and have become partakers of the Ruach Kadesh and have tasted the good word of Yahweh and the powers of the age to come and fall away to renew them again to repentance, having crucified themselves to the Son of Yahweh again and put him in open shame." So once you come to an awareness of the truth and a knowledge of the truth and an understanding of the truth of Christianity, that is the enlightenment, and we taste the gift of salvation. This is the knowledge of salvation, and have tasted the good word. This is the best of the spiritual maturity. These are ones who reach. These are beyond babes in their. So they are feeding and tasting on the good word of Yahweh and the powers of the age that awaits us. So they're already saved, but it is still possible for them to fall away. And this necessitates repentance once more. So every time a born-again believer makes a conscious decision to relapse into sin, then they need to repent, else they are guilty of spilling the blood and nailing the nail into the body that was impaled on the cross and bringing him into open shame. When we partake of his name, when we take that name upon us, we take it wherever we go. So in public, and the public, we don't want to do anything that can shame the church, universal, in the open public. Verses 10 through 12, "For Yahweh is not unrighteous to forget your work and labor of love, which you have shown toward his name, and that have attended by the saints, and do attend. And we desire each of you show the same eagerness to the entire confirmation of hope until the end, in order that you do not become sluggish and imitate those who through faith and patience inherit the promise." So in order to inherit the promise, this is the promise of the kingdom and the promise of salvation, we have to have two things: faith and patience. It's not going to be in our grasp in this lifetime, and we have to live with the mystery and the expectation and the hope, but we should not get idle towards that. We should run towards the prize, and we have to endure to the end. The same shall be saved, Mark 13:13, Matthew 24:13, somewhere in Luke 21. as well. But this is his great desire, the author's, to claim salvation, grasp it, and not let it go, because the realities and the consequences are more devastating. If we come to a saving awareness of the saving truth and then forsake it, then we nullify the atonement. This is also communicated in 10:26-27. We're going to get started with the lesson itself, 13th verse, 6th chapter, book of Hebrews. For Elohim, having promised Abraham, since he could swear by no one greater, swore by himself, saying, Today blessed I shall bless you, and increase I shall increase you. And so after being patient, he obtained the promise. So this entire process took a quarter of a century. That's 25 years. Abraham was called from the desert or from the city of Ur to be a wandering nomad across the desert at the age of 75 years old, and he bore Isaac when he was 99. So this is a 24-year waiting period. Isaac wasn't born until he was 100. So this is 25 years that he held on to the promise, and his wife was already past the childbearing age, although we do read that she was still attractive, compelling Abraham to present him as his sister on more than one occasion, at least in Egypt. But the point of the first verse is that, Elohim, who can he swear on other than himself? So an oath is binding. Anything that he takes in the name has binding consequences because the name belongs to him. And of course, there is none greater, so all he can do is swear by himself. And that promise is as good as gold. The promise is likened to an anchor, our anchor of hope, which keeps us from falling adrift in the sea at the tail end of this chapter. But Abraham, he was patient, he endured, and sure enough, 25 years later, he had the promise in Isaac. And then, the amount of time isn't designated between the 21st and the 22nd chapter. The next thing we basically read of him is that Isaac has matured, and he is called to sacrifice his son on Mount Moriah, and he went through with it because he responded with unquestioning obedience, but after that he intervened, and it brought him closer to Yahweh. So patience is rewarded, and he who endures to the end shall be saved. So Abraham, he got everything, he dropped everything and left, and he is a model and exemplar of our faith, which is exalted by several New Testament authors. For men do indeed swear by the one greater, and an oath for confirmation is for the an end of all dispute. So in the practice of swearing an oath between two human parties, the lesser is going to swear on the greater. And this is how their disputes are settled and resolved by the process. But this ties into the superiority of Melchizedek over Abraham. So Abraham is, in fact, exalted, but then we're going to read of his comparison to Melchizedek in the 7th chapter, and it's not as flattering. In this way, Elohim, resolving to show even more clearly to the heirs of promise the unchangeableness of his purpose, confirmed it by an oath. So this is the way that he confirmed it. He set the signal in motion. He confirmed it by oath, and Abraham would not live to see the ultimate promise of his descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. This was something that was beyond himself, but he was also told in Genesis 15 that his progeny would be enslaved in Egypt for a period of 400 years, and the exact number was 430 according to Exodus. But they were the heirs of the promise, the land that he promised. He situated him as a nomad in the land of the Canaanites and the Girgashites and the Jebusites and the Hittites and the 7 nations of people that already were there. And he said, this land is yours, this land is your descendants. He promised him, and he fulfilled his promise, and the Jewish people have yet to claim the fullness of the promise, which is from the Mediterranean to the Euphrates River. And that may not happen in human history. So that by 2 unchangeable matters in which it is impossible for Elohim to lie, we might have strong encouragement, we who have fled for refuge, to lay hold of the hope put before us. So the two unchangeable matters are the oath, the word, and the oath. So the promise and the oath, the oath solidifies the promise. This is a promise said out loud that he binds himself on. That means, till death do him part, on his part of the bargain. But the promises of Elohim are inviolate. It is impossible for him to lie. Anything he speaks becomes true simply because he speaks it. And this is our source of strength and security and motivation and fuel to get away from the world and its wickedness with which we were once ensnared, and to lay hold and claim of the promise and the expectation and the hope of salvation in his presence that is put before us through men such as the authors of the New Testament, which we have as an anchor of the life, both safe and firm, from entering to that within the veil. So the anchor is an instrument used in a ship to secure a weighty ship from floating down. When a ship wants to set sail and not drift anywhere, to have the security of being stable in location, they drop an anchor, and this weighty thing sinks to the bottom of the ocean and keeps it there. And the anchor of our faith is similarly unmovable, and he is a source of strength and stability. And this is within the veil. That is vocabulary of the temple, which may or may not have been operative when the writing of Hebrews was written. Where Yahweh has entered as a forerunner for us, Yahshua has entered as a forerunner for us, having become a high priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. So this concept and this theme is introduced as early as the 5th chapter. There, when we learn the order of Melchizedek, that concept is introduced, and the Messiah is our high priest, and his sort of superiority, and he is our sympathetic high priest, we read in the tail end of the 4th chapter, and we recently did a lesson on this range right here, but we're going to focus over here. He's our forerunner, so he paved the way and charted the path. He is the light that guides us to the end, and his destination, he wrote a code for us to reach him, and he wrote it in blood. 7th chapter, 1st verse. For this Melchizedek, king of Salem, king of the Most High priest of the Most High Elohim, who met Abraham returning from the slaughter of the kings, and bless him. We read of this event in the 14th chapter of Genesis. This is when Abraham's fortune was blessed, and he emerged victorious in a balance of power struggle. Him and his 318 servants bet on the right horse in a war that erupted between the geopolitical entities. And upon receiving his spoils and the just spoils of his victory, the first thing he does is he meets a king and a high priest. These are the two things that we are. He is Melchizedek, king of Salem, that's Jerusalem, the eventual city, which would be the capital, host of the temple, host of everything else. But he's also a priest, and in this he is very much like the Messiah. So there is a king by the name of Uzziah, who was for the most part a godly king, but the problem is he tried to play priest. He tried to offer the sacrifices himself at the temple, and he was struck with leprosy and remained one for the remainder of his life. But in Yahshua, these two offices are combined. They are not similarly combined in Aaron. To whom Abraham gave a tenth and part of all. First of all, is translated as the king of righteousness, and then as the king of Salem, that is, king of peace. So the tithing principle, it is established at 10% of your income or your possessions. That's when you seed a tenth and you give it back to the one who it really belongs to, the one who gave it to you. So this is where we tithe to our churches and the principle and the practice was established before the writing of the law. The Jews were commanded to do this by law. We Christians who live in the age of grace are not commanded to give 10%, but some of us who have been blessed by grace do go above and beyond the minimums of the law. But he's kings of three things. King of righteousness, this is what his name means. Melchizedek translates as king of righteousness. And king of Salem, that's Jerusalem, which translates as the king of peace. So the Messiah is the peacemaker. He is the prince of peace, Isaiah 9:6, and he is also our peace in Ephesians 2:14. Without father, without mother, without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but having been made like the Son of Man, remains a priest for all time. So the real Melchizedek was a historical human. He had a birth date and he had a death date. We don't know when it was, because what's unique about his introduction in Genesis is every other figure introduced before him, with the exception of not too many others. We were given their genealogy and their father's name and their lineage, but this man comes out of the blue, and he is both a king and a priest, so he is unique, and he is. We only read of him in the fourth chapter, but that is an allusion, a typology, not that he was beginning without end. It's only to say that because there is no definite mark of his beginnings or ends, that is the foundation of the eternal allusion to his eternal priesthood. So he's of the eternal order, which is after that of Melchizedek, who was a mortal man, a historical human, but we don't know when he was born or when he died, so it's an open-end question, which equates to the eternal in that equation. I'm probably not speaking a whole lot of sense. Verse 4, see how this great one was to even the ancestor Abraham, gave a tenth of the choicest booty. So this man was greater than Abraham because the lesser sacrifices to the greater. So this man wasn't part of the same purpose of Abraham. He was not the father of nations, but he was his priest while Abraham walked on the earth. And as such, Abraham acknowledged him and stuff, and he gave him a tenth. That's the first thing he did, was he gave a tenth to who it was due. It was his donation to the Elohim who had blessed him and gave him victory, given to his priest. And it was his choicest booty. That means he didn't hold anything back. He gave him a tenth of it right away. And truly those who are of the sons of Levi, who receive the priesthood, have a commandment to receive tithe from the people according to the Torah, that is, from their brothers, though they have come from the loins of Abraham. So the fact of their physical origin and their ancestors coming from the loins of Abraham means that Levi, who was currently in seed form, he had yet to be conceived, but it was from in Abraham's loins, which he dwelled and would come out. So he in a sense tithed to Melchizedek in the sense that he was there in seed form, and hence he is the lesser and Melchizedek is the greater in this hierarchy of priest that the author of Hebrews is communicating between the Aaronic priesthood, which was a lot more official and visible, and the eternal priesthood, so he is our high priest in heaven. And they are two different things. One is earthly and human and after Aaron, and the other is heavenly and messianic and of Melchizedek, or named after him. However, the one whose genealogy is not derived from them received tithes from Abraham, and blessed the one who held the promises. So Abraham was actually known as Abram then, but it's written as Abraham in this, so he is henceforth forever referred to Abraham even in that tense. But the one whose genealogy is not derived from them, that would have been the Melchizedek, so the ones whose genealogy were derived from him would have been the Aaronic, the lesser priesthood. And they blessed the one who held the promises, that this was his act of devotion, whereby he blessed the one, he gave to the one who had given to him in his human vessel to his priest. So he tithed accordingly. He acknowledged that Yahweh's ownership and his status as a steward of what he had gifted him. And it is beyond all dispute that the lesser is blessed by the better. So there is no reasonable argument that can be made that the better will be blessed will not be blessed by the less, or however that works. So there's a clear order that the lesser blesses the greater, and the greater is able to bless is able to bless the lesser. And it is here. Here it is men who died that receive tithe, but it is someone of whom it is witnessed that he lives. So this someone in whom it is witnessed that he lives, that is a capital letter, that can be only one human, that is Yahshua Messiah. So this is the allusion. The typology, a typology is something that has a picture or an illustration which serves to connect conceptually to a promise of prophecy to come later. There are typologies throughout the Old Testament which all point to Yahshua, and Melchizedek is made one in the New Testament, though the inference is not explicitly there in the Old Testament. It is taken off, connected in between Genesis, as David takes it off with the quote, the order of Melchizedek one in 110th Psalm, and then we hear of him again in Hebrews. So Melchizedek is sort of this obscure figure in the Bible whose significance is Christological and therefore enhanced beyond himself. We don't. He's certainly not mentioned much in the Bible, but he is a figure obscure yet prominent in his superiority over Abraham. And one might say that through Abraham, even Levi, who received the tithe, gave tithes, for he was still in the loins of his father when Melchizedek met him. So that's aligned with what I communicated earlier, that Levi was in Abraham, so therefore he was tithing to him. That establishes Melchizedek's dominance over the Aaronic priesthood. Levi was the grandson of Abraham, who was the fourth son of Jacob, Abraham's grandson, and he would have been in his loins, so to speak. He had not been conceived yet, but within the seed which contained Isaac was the seed which contained Jacob, was the seed which contained Levi. So he is not that many generations removed, and the fact that he was there means that he tithed to him in a sense. So we have to keep our priorities in order. The priesthood of the Jews is obsolete. It's no longer operative. That went out in the Old Testament, but our high priesthood is very much operative. And we are a priesthood of believers. I believe in that doctrine that is the democracy, but we are also a monarchy. We are submitted to the same sovereign master. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad to see you. Take care until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.